The powerful warrior queen image of Boudica is certainly a familiar one, and she remains a popular figure in English history. And yet, we know relatively little of the real Boudica, and for centuries, all knowledge of the tribal queen entirely disappeared. What we do know about her, other than some limited archaeological findings, was passed down by two Roman authors. One was Tacitus, a Roman senator and historian who wrote about Boudica's rebellion some 50 years after the event, as probably related to him by his father-in-law, Gnaeus Julius Agricola, who was serving in Britain during the time of Boudica's revolt. The second author was Roman statesman and Greek-born Dio Cassius, who wrote about the tribal queen some 150 years later, largely using Tacitus as his source. Both writers aimed to appeal to their readers in Rome and were out to emphasize the barbarity of this female leader. Dio commenting that the ruin brought upon the Romans by a woman caused them the greatest shame. Not since Cleopatra had the Roman Empire suffered such humiliation, although they would again meet their match 200 years later when Queen Zenobia, discussed later in this book, at Palmyra, took arms against the Roman Empire. Boudica first appears in historical records in 60 or 61 CE, after the death of her husband, Prasutagus, who was the ruler of the Iceni, a tribe based in East Anglia in England. Prior to the Roman invasion some 17 years earlier, England was loosely made up of regional tribal areas, some of which were placed under direct control of the Romans. Other tribal leaders such as Prasutagus became client kings, meaning they could retain their lands in exchange for political allegiance to the Romans. According to Tacitus, when Prasutagus died, he'd bequeathed his wealth both to the Roman Emperor Nero and his two daughters, and in doing so assumed his friendly relationship with Rome would continue after his death. The invaders, however, had other ideas. They promptly annexed Prasutagus's kingdom, took his property, and according to Tacitus, flogged Boudica and gang-raped her daughters. Boudica was rightly outraged, set herself up as the new ruler, and launched an uprising, determined to drive the Romans out of Britain. They were joined by other disaffected Britons, including the neighbouring Trinovantes, whose former capital, Camulodunum, modern Colchester, had been taken over by the Roman settlers, and their lands redistributed to retired Roman soldiers. Dio Cassius suggests that it was the sudden recall of Roman loans from tribal leaders that set off the revolt. But whatever the cause, grievances against the Roman settlers were long-standing and mounting. The only physical description we have of Boudica was provided by Dio Cassius, who wrote that she was very tall and, in appearance, most terrifying, in the glance of her eye most fierce, and her voice was harsh. Going on to say that she had a mass of tawny hair falling down to her waist, and she wore a large golden necklace, colourful tunic, and thick cloak fastened by a brooch. Over the years, she's been known by several versions of her name. Boadicea was once the favoured spelling, thought to be a mistranscription of Tacitus, who had her down as Boudica with 2 C's. Many now think the correct spelling of her name is Boudica with 1 C, which is closer in line with the Celtic word Buda for victory. In 60 or 61 CE, whilst the Roman forces were busy on the western fringes of Britain, campaigning against the Druids in Anglesey, Boudica and her army headed towards the very heart of Roman Britain, Camulodunum. Boudica's forces stormed the largely undefended city, and archaeological evidence suggests they went to enormous lengths to raze it to the ground, levelling anything Roman, including the Temple of Claudius that the Romans had recently built. Many civilians lost their lives, the evidence suggesting the attack was determined and murderous. Boudica's army would next head for Londinium, or London. The second